Well, let me know if you can relate to something like this. Some of you might be living it now. Some of you might remember when. But has this ever occurred to you? You wake up in the morning after you've pushed snooze a few times, because let's be real, we don't want to get out of bed, do we? And as soon as your feet hit the floor, it is off to the races. You're trying to get kids ready for school, get them dressed, wear something that looks semi-decent. You've long given up having to match their socks because that's a losing battle. But as long as they have two, you call it square, right? Make sure they have lunch to go. You get them in the car. First, you got to figure out who's taking who and where, because some kids go to this school and some go to the other one. So you make all those drop-offs and you give yourself a pat on the back because they're only a few minutes late this time, as opposed to 15 and 20 and so on. You rush to work, and your boss greets you with, "Hey, I need that project done today." After you told him, there's no way you can get it done today. It's just not happening. And so you decide, you work through lunch, you try to make it happen, do the best you can, even though you know it's going to fall short, and you know it's going to be rejected as soon as you try to submit it. After work, you play the kid roundup game. Get everybody. Some kids have track practice, some have baseball practice, some are staying late for tutoring help. By the time you get everybody home, you realize we've got nothing for dinner. I've heard someone say one of the hardest parts about being an adult is you have to figure out what's for dinner 7 nights a week. There's no days off of that. And so you figure, well, I ain't got time to cook. I'm stressed out as it is. You go and you hit up drive-thru, get everybody something from McDonald's, and you tell yourself, you know what, I'll start that diet tomorrow. That's what we'll get on that thing. You get everybody home. It's already late. You're trying to get kids in the shower, and of course they're bickering over who goes first or who has to because they don't want to in the first place. And they're arguing over who gets to play with the toys and things of that nature. Finally, when you wanted them in bed by 8, at 8:30, when they're actually moving in that direction, one of them tells you, "Oh, hey, by the way, here's a note from my teacher." And you look at it and you see little Johnny is several days behind on his schoolwork. And he says, "Well, I didn't do it today either, and I need your help." So you spend some time with little Johnny trying to get the homework done. By the time he's nestled in, you go out and you see the kitchen's a wreck because it doesn't matter. Have you noticed this? If you cook at home or if you eat out, the kitchen is always a wreck. I don't know how it works, but that's always the case. And so you spend some time cleaning up on it. Husband comes home in the middle of all this, and he seems rather snippy. You make just a note of that, but you let him go. Hopefully he'll calm down in a little bit. Right around 10, when everything's starting to quiet down, and you're exhausted, and you're at the end of your rope, you sit down because you want to watch a little bit of TV just to veg. I'm just going to drain for just a minute. An hour goes by, you look at your watch and you go, "Whoop, I got to go." And so you start heading back to get ready for bed. You remember that there was something bugging your husband, so you ask him about it, and you say, "What's wrong?" And he says, "Nothing." And hops straight in bed. And so you lay there, and you're looking back on the day, and you look at all the things that you wanted to get done. You wanted today to connect with your husband. You wanted today to connect with your kids. You wanted today to connect with God, to have time to read the Bible, read a devotional, to have time to pray. And as you're lying there, you realize that absolutely none of those got done. And right around midnight, as the staple food groups, the staple diet of caffeine, sugar, and processed food begins to wear off, you drift into a very uneasy sleep, knowing that in just a few hours you need to get up and start the whole thing over again. Have anybody experienced that? Or is that just a day in the life in the Kaufman house? I don't know. Now, some of y'all might be there. Some of you might look back on those days. Some of y'all might be single, never experienced that, but you know what it's like to be busy, busy, busy. Because every night of the week after work, if you're working late especially, but after work you have another group that you're going to and you want to connect with these other people, and day just melts in the day, which melts in the day. You realize, I don't know what day it is, and I'm starting to not even know who I am anymore. And so then when you come to church on Sunday and someone says, "Hey, how are you doing?" You give them the good response, "Oh, I'm fine, just tired." Isn't that the universal response? Busy. I saw this thing. I don't know if it was a cartoon or where it was, but it was two kids talking. And they were talking about what does it mean to grow up? What does it mean to be an adult? And one of them says, well, to be an adult just means you take turns telling each other how tired you are. I figured, yeah, they might be onto something there. But when we live this fast-paced life where it's one thing leads to the next, where one day we hope we can catch up on sleep, and then as some folks say, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead, I'm not going to worry about that now. We begin to realize that our walks with God grow further and further and further apart. Because instead of living out this journey with Jesus that we've been talking about, we're too busy trying to make this journey with our calendars and our to-do lists and everything that's on there. Our lives begin to be defined by one word: hurry. I read somewhere just this past week, someone had said that hurry is not of the devil. Hurry is the devil. Can I get an amen on that one? Because the thing about our journey with Jesus, when we're walking with Jesus, we walk at his pace. And he's not in a hurry. Have you noticed that? God is not in a hurry. Often we wish that he was. We say, Lord, I've been praying about this and I want it done now. And God says, in a little bit. And the reason for that is you can't live a life of hurry and a life of love. Those don't go together because love takes time. Love takes the ability to respond to each other, to reach out to each other. Love requires that sometimes we just sit together and not do anything. But if we're always in a hurry, we can't do any of that stuff. And now God, he looks at us. He looks at how we struggle with rest. Can we say that we struggle with rest? Can we say that as a society, as a culture, and even as a church, as a Big C church, that we do not rest well? Is that a fair statement? God sees that. And he notices, first of all, he knows that we are by far not the first people to struggle with rest. This is one of those things that is just part of being human, part of humanity. And so long ago, God created this rhythm of work and rest. He gave us this gift of rest, and he gave it to us for a purpose. God called this gift, God called this rhythm the Sabbath. Now, what is the Sabbath? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Sabbath, if you look all the way back in the history of God's people, that history that we are a part of today, by the way, church, you'll see that long time ago, God's people were enslaved in Egypt. And they were there for 400 years. And while they were enslaved, they would work all day, every day, sun up to sundown, with no days off. They would be literally worked to death. And then when any of them would try to make their burden easier, their response was often, well, if you've got time to complain, you've got time to do more work, don't you? And so over time, over the generations, over the centuries, God's people would just bend their backs under that burden and just try to make it through the day. Sounds like that characterizes a lot of our society today, doesn't it? Just trying to make it through the day. And so over time, God brought his people out of Egypt. He brought them out of slavery. He brought them into freedom. And as he's speaking with them, and as he's telling them how they are to live, and as he gives them this law by which they are to live, right there included in the law is that they are to honor the Sabbath. They are to honor this rhythm of work and of rest. They are to set apart the Sabbath as a time for rest and a time for worship. What is the Sabbath? The Sabbath can be best characterized as this: it is a gift and a time to do good. And we can't miss either component of that. But as God's people, as they entered the promised land, the land that God had been promising to them for years, for decades, for centuries, as they entered in there, God said, make sure you observe the Sabbath. Make sure you take this time to rest and to worship. And God's people, well, they were people then too. And so rather quickly, the Sabbath got thrown by the side. That time set apart to rest and to worship was crossed right off of their schedules. And they would fill it with other things. They would fill it with work. They would fill it with other worship, worshiping other gods. They would fill it with all kinds of things that took them away from God, that distracted them from him. And so as time progressed, they ended up being sent into exile as foreign nations would come and would conquer Israel. The people would be sent off all over the known world at the time. And they would re-enter a time of slavery to where once again they are worked all day, every day, with no rest, no Sabbath, with no hope of even getting out of that condition. Now, as we fast forward the time, you see that some of God's people were able to come back into the promised land. They tried to observe the Sabbath, but once again, they didn't. They experienced hardship after hardship. Over time, there was a group called the Pharisees came into being. And the Pharisees, their intentions were really good. Usually the Pharisees get a bad rap, and it's well-deserved, but their intentions are good. Their intentions were to help people live a life that honors God. They wanted the people to observe the Sabbath. They saw how important the Sabbath was to God, and so they wanted to help people observe that. Now, their form of helping was far from it. Because the way that they would help is they would say, okay, God says that you're to keep the Sabbath. Well, what does that mean? And so they would create dozens and dozens of laws, big lists of what you can do and what you can't do on the Sabbath. In fact, have you ever heard the phrase, a Sabbath day's journey? You see that in the Gospels, they talk about that. A Sabbath day's journey, these Pharisees had decided that the furthest you could travel on the Sabbath was 1,999 paces. The idea was they thought 2,000 was good, but if you lose track, let's just pull one back. That way we've got a little bit of a cushion there. And then if you were to travel further than that, they would consider you sinning. And you would need to repent. You would need to sacrifice. You need to do all these things to get back in right standing. And that's just one example, guys. There's lots of them. And so what they ended up doing was turning this blessing from God and turning it into a burden. They took God's gift, God's invitation, and they turned it into a hammer by which they could beat down other people. They so lost sight of the heart of God and of the heart of the Sabbath. And so one day, on the Sabbath, as the Pharisees are out doing their thing, keeping tabs on everybody, they come across this group. Jesus was in this group. And they've heard a little bit about Jesus already. Not much, but they heard enough to know that they don't like Jesus. And they saw his followers there. And they had an interaction about the Sabbath. And I want us to see this today. I want us to see, what did Jesus tell them about the Sabbath? And what does he have for us today about this rhythm of work and of rest? If you have your Bibles, open them up. We're looking at Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. Mark is the second book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Look at Mark chapter 2. And we're looking at verse 23. It says this: one day, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. As his disciples, his followers, as they walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Pause right there. It was not unlawful to pick some heads of grain as you're walking through a field. There's a specific provision for that in the Old Testament. If you're curious, Deuteronomy 23:25 specifically states that. I find that interesting. Verse 25, Jesus answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? Jesus says, haven't you read your Bibles? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is a Lord even of the Sabbath. Now, looking at this passage, we can dive deep into here on what David did and who the high priest was and what does it mean to enter the temple to eat the consecrated bread. Let's just say that was specifically against the law, but in a time of need, Jesus was showing them that David ate. And so he's saying maybe there's something bigger going on here. And then he would have pointed out to them, by the way, what David did technically violated the law. There was no law about the Sabbath that Jesus and his disciples had broken. They broke the Pharisees' traditions and their commands. And so we could dive into all of that. But let's suffice it to say this. The Sabbath is a gift. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God didn't create humanity so that we could uphold the Sabbath. God created the Sabbath to uphold humanity. Are you with me here? God created this time of rest and of worship to help his creation, to help his people in their own walks, their own journeys with Jesus. Now, the threat that they faced at the time, the threat that they had towards the Sabbath was that it would be turned into a burden, that this blessing of God would be turned into something that you could do resentfully. So, yeah, I don't want to follow the Sabbath, but I will, just so that they don't tell me nothing about it. Anytime you try to follow God like that, it doesn't work, by the way. The threat today for the Sabbath is different. You see, the threat that we have against the Sabbath is that we might neglect it completely and completely forget about this time of rest and of worship. Now, why is that? What do you think, if you were to ask somebody, do you keep the Sabbath? Or since most folks don't know what Sabbath means, do you have time for rest? When do you rest? And they're going to say no. And you ask why. What's the number one reason they give? Busy. I ain't got time for all that. And then when you dive in even deeper and you say, well, what about Jesus' command? What about the vision right here at CenterPoint that we would be a people that loves God and loves people and lives it out? And they'll say, yeah, it sounds great. I'll do that. Second Tuesday of next week. Our lives are overwhelmed with our to-do lists that the thought of adding something to it, we can't do that. Or the thought of trying to spend time doing nothing, it's just not there. And so let's look at this for just a moment. One of the major things, and this is within my own life, this idea of rest, of Sabbath rest, of what it means to rest well, this is something that that our family has had to navigate, and we're still navigating. You see, towards the end of high school and into college, I became a raging workaholic. I worked a few different jobs, and often I had more overtime than everybody else put together. And I did that over and over and over again. Part of it was we needed money. We were poor. But part of it was also I saw my identity as someone that worked the most. I based my worth and my validation on being able to outwork everybody around me. And I did this for really about 4 or 5 years. But about 3 years into our marriage, I began to look back and to see, well, what do I have as a result of all of this work that I'm doing? I had a wife that I hardly ever saw. I had 2 kids that I didn't see at all. I had all kinds of stress and fatigue and anxiety. Well, that's not working. That's not what God has for me. Right around that time is when I started following Jesus, began my own journey with him, and saw real quick that our journeys with Christ, they lead away from a life that's consumed by stress and anxiety and exhaustion and hurry. And so for some folks hearing this right now, some of you online, your major obstacle to enjoying a Sabbath, to enjoying a time of rest, is a form of workaholism, of trying to outwork everybody around you and of seeing your worth in that. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. That's not worth it. That's one reason. There's another major reason that keeps us from having the time to rest and to worship well. And I think it's summed up in just one simple word, and that is distraction. There's other things going on that distract us away from this time set apart to connect with God and to connect with his people. John Ortberg, he puts it like this. He says, for many of us, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of it. We will just skim our lives instead of actually living them. First time I saw that, I just had to pause for a moment. Whoa. That defined me to a T at the time. What does this distraction look like? Especially since 2007. Now, I didn't know this, but many people look at 2007 as the birth of the digital age. In 2007, we started a new age, and I didn't know it. I missed out on it, I guess. And so I got to think, well, what happened in 2007? Well, in 2007, Facebook exploded in growth. In 2007, Twitter became a thing. In 2007, Apple released the iPhone. In 2007, the cloud started to be used all kinds of things. What is the cloud? I'm not sure, but I know it's a thing. Ask somebody else, they can tell you. In 2007, so many different technological inventions were made that nowadays, if you look at from 2006 or if you look at today, just about everybody, we've got everything right here. All the distractions I could ever want, right here at my fingertips. How often do you see people walking down the street doing this thing? Or sitting down while they're watching TV, they're doing this thing. 2 screens at once. Some folks even use these things in the bathroom. I'm not getting in that, but that's a thing. And that shouldn't be a thing because that's gross. So, a few years ago, Apple, they did a survey, they did a study, a research project, because they want to see how their iPhone is being used, how their product's being used, so that they can help it be used even more, right? It makes sense for them. What they discovered was this. The average iPhone user over the course of the day touches their phone 200? Oh, you're going to be let down, man. 2,617 times over 76 sessions for a total average of 2.5 hours per day. Wow. Let's look at social media. For those with an account, they spend on average 705 hours per year on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. TikTok's a thing now. Whatever it is, that's what they're doing there. Now, this does not include, by the way, just general internet usage, being on Google, things of that nature. This doesn't include Netflix binging or Hulu binging, or if you don't have any of that stuff, CNN binging and Fox News binging. Watch out now. This doesn't include any of that stuff, okay? That falls under TV. The average American family has the TV on per year 2,737.5 hours. Now, I taught math for a little bit, so I was curious about this. You know how many hours there are in a year? 8,760, good guess. And leap year, there's more, who knew it? But with that, a full 31% of the year is spent with the TV on. The whole family's distracted. The adults are distracted with their phones. The whole family's distracted with TV. The kids, they see these things. They get distracted through video games. One study found that the average male in America, by the time he turns 21, has spent 10,000 hours playing video games. Now, let me say this right here. I'm not anti-phone. I'm not anti-TV. I'm not anti-video game or social media. None of that stuff. And God isn't either. You know, God's not scared of Facebook. Sometimes I think we act as if he were. He's not scared of any of that stuff. He's not scared of Xbox. He's not scared of TV or any of that. That's not my point. My point is to say this. No wonder we don't have time for rest and for worship. No wonder we don't have time to deeply connect with God or to deeply connect with the people around us. Now, some people might say, well, TV is our form of rest. We rest around the TV. And that might be true, and that's great. But part of Sabbath is this deep connection, both upwards towards God and around toward each other. And I would submit to you that it's very, very hard to do that when the TV's on. And by the way, just because when I read this stuff, I think, man, those people, what are they doing? I don't have any of those problems. They also found out that the vast majority of their respondents had no clue how much time they spend on these different things. And so that told me right away, the problem's not out there. It's right here. How am I spending my time? Am I distracted? Am I drawn away from my own walk with God because of these things right here? No wonder we don't have time for rest. And in the meantime, instead of using that time to connect with each other, it keeps us from those connections. You see, it keeps us from connecting with our kids, especially when they're starting to find out, when your son starts to find out who girls are, and your daughter starts to find out who boys are. We miss those times. We miss the times to connect with people at work and to be able to walk with each other through not only the struggles at work, but struggles in our personal lives. We miss it. We miss the ability to connect with our neighbors. And we don't even notice when the lady next door just became a widow. And we miss that opportunity to connect with her. Our distractions, they keep us so much from living a Sabbath life, a life with rest. And once again, I'm not beating up on any of it. These things, all these things that I just mentioned, they make great servants and terrible masters. So let's make sure that they're the servant. Because if they're left unchecked, you know who becomes the servant? Right here. So, if we remove some of these distractions, if we pull back on our hours at work, instead of putting in 80 hours a week, we try to do, say, 50, something like that. If we try to get away from this workaholism that I've been struggling with and I'm coming out of, Jesus and I are on a journey together. And if we decide, well, I'm going to observe the Sabbath. I'm going to do the Sabbath. That's something I want to do. And so you wake up in the morning and you say, hey, today's Sabbath day. That's great. What do I do? Does Sabbath mean you sit in your lazy boy all day? No. What do we do on the Sabbath? Let's look. Keep reading. If you still have your Bibles open. Look at Mark chapter 3, the very next verse. Chapter 3, verse 1. It says, another time, this is another Sabbath, by the way, not the same day, but another Sabbath. Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Oh, he better not be healing anybody today. Verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. And then Jesus asked them, these are the group trying to accuse him, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians, another group there, how they might kill Jesus. You notice the irony here? The Pharisees were all bent out of shape because Jesus is healing somebody on the Sabbath. And so on the Sabbath, they get together and plot how to kill him. See, when Jesus asked them this question, is it lawful to do good or to do evil? He's asking them right here. Jesus answers his question through his actions, and they give their answer through theirs. So what do we do on the Sabbath? The Sabbath is a gift and a time to do good. It is a time for worship. It's a time for blessing. The Sabbath draws us to God, and it draws us towards people. Now, this looks different, by the way, for each of us. What it actually looks like, I'm not going to give you a checklist of what the Sabbath looks like, because there's no such thing. It's different for every single one of us. It looks different based on our personalities. If you're an introvert like me, a rest involves sitting down and reading a book, and you love it. But if you're an extrovert, like not me, the idea of sitting quietly and reading might sound horrible to you. And so rest for you might be going out and being with a lot more people, and that's great. But here's just a few ideas on what Sabbath could look like. If you have kids in the home, Sabbath could look like reading the Bible with them, praying with them. It can look like coloring with them, getting the crayons and the markers out, sitting at the table. It can look like playing catch in the backyard. It looks like noticing when your son begins to notice girls and your daughter begins to notice boys, and being there for that conversation. Sabbath could look like all of those things. If you're single, if there's no kids in the home, Sabbath could look like what I'd said earlier about sitting quietly and reading. That could be amazing. Sabbath could look like reaching out to your neighbors and inviting them over for dinner, or signing up to be a part of that Bible study or that reading group that you've always wanted to be a part of but never had time to do, or to get out there and go for that jog that you've been wanting to do and haven't had the time to do. Maybe you're retired. Maybe you don't have to worry about working an 8 to 5 during the day. Sabbath could look like any of those things. It could look like reaching out to different nonprofits here in town that minister in an area where you have a passion. If you have a passion for serving the homeless population right here in Columbia, it can look like reaching out to Turning Point Ministries, ministry we support here at CenterPoint. It can look like reaching out to Coyote Hill as they minister to foster families and children that are navigating trauma, and just asking them, what can I do? I've got this time set aside. Can I come and serve in any way? Sabbath could look like playing worship music and taking time at the house to sing and to respond to God in that way. These are all different things that Sabbath could look like. Now today, we don't really have time to really unpack this idea. One of the things I'm loving about the series through Mark is that we get these little snippets, just these little windows into the life of Jesus. And every invitation that Jesus gives us, it's an invitation to dive deeper. And so later on, we're working on putting this together actually. We're going to take a whole series and look at this idea of rest. Rest for our souls, rest for our bodies. Because I don't know about anybody else, I need to be a part of that. I need to learn more about that. And so that's coming down the pipe. But in the meantime, how will you Sabbath today? How will you rest well today? What does that look like in your world and in your life? Because I don't know about you. I want to be a people right here. I want to be a part of a people that worships well, that blesses well, that serves well, that rests well. And in fact, elsewhere, Jesus gave another invitation. And worship band, why don't you come back up here? Jesus gives this simple invitation that says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He doesn't say, "I'm going to give you more to do. I'm going to give you more things to check off your list." I will give you rest. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This journey with Jesus that we're on, it's not marked by hurry. It's not marked by a life of stress and exhaustion. It's marked by rest, by the peace that comes from living a life of rest, knowing that we can rest because Jesus rests. Now, this journey with Jesus, it all begins the same way. Jesus gives us the same invitation: follow me, come to me. And then we respond. Have you come to that point in your life, oh church? It's where you've heard Jesus call. You've heard him say, follow me, come to me. And you've responded to him. Are you living that life of rest right now? Or when you hear that, do you think, I don't have time for any of that because I don't even have time for Jesus? What I want to invite you to do right now is to consider that. And either for the first time, for the 100th time, say yes to Jesus. Yes to this invitation that he gives all of us to follow him, to be with him, to be on this lifelong journey with Jesus. Part of the way that we respond to Christ, part of the way that we live out this journey with Jesus is through worship. Worship is integral to our lives with Christ, to our spiritual lives. It is vital for our rest. And so as we close out our time, I want to invite you to stand and let's worship together, church.